All right. Welcome to the Lovecraft Easing podcast. I'm Mike Davis. Pete Rollick is here. Matt Carpenter is here. Rick Lay is here. And Scott Bradley is here, our guest. Hey, Scott.
Hi.
How
Thanks
you
for having
doing?
me on. I'm
Sure
doing
thing.
quite well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out, like I said. Um, last week, we'll do introductions in a second, and I'll
Sure.
introduce Scott. He's making it easy because all I have to do is read the second paragraph in the email that you guys sent.
We do the best we can.
So Halloween was last week,
Yes.
and you weren't here, Pete, but I thought we had one of the best Halloween shows we've ever had.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had family commitments.
Yeah, well, we do a Halloween show every year, Scott. And last week we read strange but true stories that have happened to listeners and panelists and things like that.
Ooh,
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's pretty
I
cool.
like the idea. I talk about that kind of thing on my podcast every so often, where everywhere that you go, there's the concept of folk horror, right? And everybody thinks that folk horror is a very specific thing, but it really is just this idea that we have something local around us that always talks to whatever the problem was, the scary, the shame, whatever it is of the town, and that we have everybody has these stories that came up with their childhood. You know, a place that was haunted, a thing that they did that kind of freaked them out, and I love
Right.
collecting those stories because I think they talk to the area a lot. I grew up in the coal mines of Pennsylvania, so it's funny how the devil was always coming out of the ground, right? Which is where
Right.
we strip mined all the coal, and so he's always coming out of holes in the ground. There are always people who are lost in the mines. At midnight, if you went to this spot, you could hear them clawing, and there was supposed to be a guy who was cut in half, and he was like skittering around like on his hands through the brush.
That's great.
All these little crazy, creepy things just to keep the kids out of the strip mines, right? But it has
Plus, it's
its
all
own
this sitting around the
energy.
campfire for the last, 500,000 years or whatever,
Oh
and telling
yeah,
stories at
absolutely.
night.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. I say that the horror is ancient for that reason. It's the second oldest story ever told. First story around the campfire is the elders sitting there going, "Thank you, spirit, for having us all here. Thank you for the food. Thank you, animals. Thank you, fire. As long as we stay together, we're family and we have power." And the second story is, "Whatever you do, don't go into the woods. There's something horrible in the woods."
Don't go beyond the
Cautionary
reach of
tale.
the candle or the
Yes.
firelight.
Of the firelight, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's the cautionary tale. It's the thing that, the first story ever told tells you who your tribe is. The second story tells you who your monster is. It's what we
Oh
what we
wow.
worry about.
Never thought about that. That's great. Hey, take a look at this, guys. For those of you
Oh
listening
wow.
later, I am holding up an action figure of Captain Blake from The Fog. My friend Kelly Young sent this to me a month or so ago, and
That's astonishing.
he knows The Fog is one of my favorite horror movies.
Yeah,
And
excellent.
Just to quote Sheen from Jimmy Neutron,
yeah,
it's not a doll, it's an action figure. There's a difference.
that's right.
Wasn't to my dad. When I was trying to get a G.I. Joe action figure, my dad thought there was something wrong with me. He's like, "You're not playing with dolls." I said, "It's G.I. Joe." He's like, "That's a
It's not a
doll."
doll. Oh my God.
That's when they were the size of Barbies.
Yeah, right. He's
Well,
like,
Then they became mini things in the 70s.
yeah. Well, he disagrees with he doesn't think The Fog is that great of a movie.
oh
So
wow. Well, that's not my feeling at all on it. I mean, I see
he's wrong a
where it's
lot. Yeah.
creaky. Yeah, I see where it's creaky in different spots, but I was like looking at that, and I'm going, I don't see Rob Bottin's face anywhere on that thing because he, of course, played Blake. They just asked him to come in because he was tall and he was doing some of the special effects of the fog, but you never really see the face that close. So I was kind of laughing and looking at that maw, that gaping dark maw that Blake
Yeah.
has, yeah, in that thing. But I love the fog. It's one of it's perfect EC comic stuff, and I understand that when Carpenter first did that film, he did an edit where it was more like an M.R. Jamesian thing. It was all, did it happen or didn't it happen? Is
Right.
it ghostly? And then everybody went, no, we need people to see that it did happen. And so he
Uh,
went back and put in all the horror aspects, the
well,
big
and especially
kills.
the knife, the killing the
Yeah.
semen with a knife and all that. I think that was
Yeah.
later the powers
Yeah.
that be are like, we're not getting enough people dying
Yeah.
here.
Not enough juice. I think that's one of those things that I love about Carpenter's style, and it's an editing style, but it's also how he sets up shots. He does this thing where he expands time instead of compressing time. So you have this kill, and you see it in different things, like in Christine, there's a moment like it, but it's a great shot here where you have this thing where the flashlight hits the ground. And that's real time, right?
Mhm.
And then we see how many times somebody gets stabbed before the flashlight rolls just a little bit. And then it rolls a little bit more. And so there's these intercutting where something that's probably that fast in real life, we get to see it elongated, and it has this really disturbing mood to it. I love that movie because of those things. And I watched it so many times because it's the first movie that I got to see legally as an R-rated film.
Oh, nice.
And they let me in other words. And I was so excited by that movie that summer. We nearly killed my friends because we started getting smoke bombs, and he had a little cabin for hunting, and we just put everybody in the cabin and throw smoke bombs underneath the door and say it was the fog, not realizing how toxic smoke bomb smoke would be.
Well, I can see your this is correct. S.A. Bradley dubbed the Walking Horror Encyclopedia. I can see that already. As a longtime horror lover who turned his passion into purpose, featured on everything from Dread Central, iHorror, FearCon, and Lovecraft Easing, and more. Bradley is a lively guest to cover why horror doesn't need your shame and how watching horror can actually make us happier and healthier. That's a big question a lot. I want to do introductions real quick, but that's something that is really important to talk about too. You know, people always, why do you watch horror? Why are you trying to scare yourself? And there's some good reasons behind it.
Mhm.
Peter Rollick, how the hell
Yes,
are you?
sir.
How are you?
I'm good. Little old, feeling it,
Little.
but you know,
Boo hoo.
yeah, I know.
You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Pete Rollick, author. My latest book is The Eldritch Equations, a sequel to the Dreams in the Witch House.
Yeah.
Mm.
The story, not the
Not that.
adaptation on Cabinet of Curiosity.
Or there was
Would hope
another
not.
one that was done too under Masters of Horror. They did a Dreams of the Witch House. I think it was
Yes,
Stuart Gordon did it.
did.
It's actually better.
However, this one is my sequel is particularly inspired by the rock opera.
Ha! Ha!
You
That
sure it wasn't inspired by the movie that
I
was,
forgot they
2020?
sent me the LP for that. I forgot about that.
Oh,
got it
I want
right
that.
back there. You want it? I'll send it to you.
All right. But the rock
they
opera
won't
is
care.
absolutely fabulous. If you haven't seen it or heard it, it's really, really good.
All right, Pete, here you go. Look at this.
The best song in that is Afterthought.
Yeah.
It's a really good
Wow.
music.
What do you think? So
Yep. And it's
I'll send that to you.
there's actually I think there's at least one, maybe two music videos for it.
while I got records out,
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Nice.
my same friend, really good friend of mine. He's such a good friend because he's like, I know it's one of your favorite horror movies, so I'm sending you this. He sent me
That's
this too.
great.
And
Wow.
what I'm holding up for the people listening later is several LPs from the Fog soundtrack, and it does the first track on the LP is the John Houseman reading the story,
Yeah,
like in the
just
beginning.
wonderful. We recorded that when I was a kid. We snuck a cassette player into the movie theater so we could get that, because of course
Really?
back then,
That's
you know,
awesome.
obviously it was nowhere, right? You didn't
Yeah.
get anything until the Fog started showing up on HBO, I guess. So we used to send that to each other to freak each other out. We would record it, a recording of a recording of a recording using an old stereo and a mono tape recorder. But I love that so much, that beginning. It was just like,
Yeah,
so awesome.
these LPs are pretty good, as well as Dreams in the Witch House, which I'm gonna send to Pete. So, Rick, you want to introduce yourself?
Rick Lay, writer and pulp magazine collector.
Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt. I do a couple things around here. I run the Lovecraft Easing movie night. Last night we watched 2 episodes of the Cabinet of Curiosities.
Oh.
I'm also sort of steward of the Lovecraft reread that we're doing currently at the main page for the Lovecraft e-zine community. If you want in on that, you just go to the Facebook page and look at the featured posts, and you'll click right to the reread. But I have a prize today that's really good. There is an artist who is very good but doesn't get much attention. His name is Steve Maschuk, and he has provided me with 2 high-quality prints.
Wow.
Nice.
These
That's
are
a shadow
gorgeous,
out of time.
and
Huh?
I think they could be easily get framed and hung in your house with pride. He wanted them donated so that they could be used as a prize, so we're doing that now. So
Oh,
if you want to try
that's
and win
nice.
these prints, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put Maschuk in the subject heading. And at the same time, why don't you just go do a Google search of his art and you'll see how good he is.
How do you spell
How
his
do you-
last name?
I just,
Maschuk.
All
One
right.
more time.
Maschuk.
Okay.
Nice.
He's really good.
So a lot of this art is associated with a project that I'm tangentially involved in.
Right.
This is we're putting together, and we had him on the show a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, a few months back. Yeah,
It's
it was
a
really
music-
interesting.
Right. It's a music slash scientific slash religious review of like the elder things arriving on Earth, and their progression up into the Mountains of Madness.
Nice. Yeah.
So there's a lot of music coming out for that, and the art, and I got to do sort of the psalmody of the elder things, which is sort of a quasi-religious text of their arrival and propagation on the planet.
Well, excuse me. I'm Mike Davis with Lovecraft e-zine, and I received this from my son today. This pipe. It's a pipe for those who are listening later. So Pete, I said to Danielle, I said, "Hey, this pipe is functional. I'm going to start smoking this pipe."
This is not a picture of a pipe.
What?
It's a very old existential,
Yeah.
yes.
idea.
Oh, right. Anyway, so I'm like, yeah, I think I'm gonna go get something for this pipe, and maybe go to the Shire, get some old Toby, something, and she's like, I was like, I think this pipe works, and she's like, divorce courts work too. So like, all right, it's just for show. It doesn't work. So anyway,
Now you just need a deerstalker cap.
that's right, and some comfortable slippers.
But it's not a meerschaum, I don't think.
I don't know what that is.
Meerschaum, I believe, was the type of pipe that's Scotland, yes, Sherlock Holmes would use.
Oh,
The big one. The one that-
Yeah, the big one that
Right.
hid his opiates
Basil
inside.
Rathbone.
yeah.
The famous picture of Basil Rathbone profile shots over the pipe, and that's what he used.
So
Or a bubble pipe, one of the two.
So Scott, you also have a book called Screaming for Pleasure: How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy. And you have a podcast called Hellbent for Horror. Let's start with that. How does horror make you happy and healthy?
Well, as I tell people,
A question we've discussed a lot before, but I'm always interested in
sure.
someone else's
So
take.
yeah, I always say, it's not going to cure your lumbago. That's not the kind of health that we're talking about. We're talking about the small things, little things that mean a lot. It's usually the amount of the emotional and mental health that we're talking about when we're doing this. And
Right.
I talk about how, if you look at things like Carl Jungian idea of the shadow self, is essentially you have the persona, which I have on right now, said all you guys like me. But then there's this primal piece that all of us have. It's this dark side that really has all of our more disturbing energy inside of it. But everybody has it. And what Jung has said often is that is natural, but it is also something that needs to be paid attention to. In other words, like a spoiled brat, if you don't pay attention to it, it's going to get your attention. And that's when you do things like get into all sorts of trouble because you don't feed that thing and it decides it's going to blow up in your face. So I think of horror as this healthy handshake between ourselves and our shadow self. And it allows us to have this dance. And it's a place where we get to take a look at these parts of us and accept those parts of us. It allows us to still have a sense of play. A lot of adults, we just lose that sense of play. I think play allows us to keep ourselves imaginative, but also just enjoying the parts of us that sometimes don't get nurtured inside of the regular world. You also end up finding our group. You know, I'm on this podcast right now because I came out of the closet and said that I'm a horror fan and that I really love it and that I'll talk about it to anybody. And strangely enough, I'm not the only person. I find other people who are like that. And I think if you are able to have a sense of play, you're able to find a group of people that you can be with. You find that you are dealing okay with understanding parts of yourself, and you're able to take a look at this shadow and give it some nurturing, and also just the idea that to me, the real world is just scary as hell. I can't do anything about it. But I can, on the other hand, do what I did when I was a kid, which is I watched horror movies when things were really, really rough at the house, when things were not going very well in my young childhood, when there was weird divorce, that when there was no divorce, and all this weird rage and anger in the house. I ended up seeing a film that talked about how mom and dad might not be there for you. And it was Don't Look Now, where a child drowns. Right. And that wasn't about the child drowning as much as it was that I recognized there's nothing scarier than seeing a father crying. And that movie had a father crying. And so for me, it wasn't Hair of the Dog That Bit You, but instead of that terrifying me more, even though I had nightmares after it, I felt somehow like I got seen. That was almost as if that was for me. I felt better instead of less less
kind of
enjoying
I'm not the only one type
I'm
of
not
feeling.
the only one. Yeah. And so what I found is, what I tell people is, I can turn off a horror movie anytime I want. I can close a book that's scaring me too much. But if I don't do that, there is this feeling that I've somehow accomplished something. And when I was a kid, that mattered so much. And so I look at it as I'm able to work on the monsters inside of me and the monsters in my community, the monsters in my culture. Monsters are metaphors. When these guys that are behind me, they stand for whatever I need them to stand for at any given moment. And I think it does it culturally as well as it does for the individual. And so if I have that, I have a safe distance between me and the thing that I don't want to look at. No one's going to sit and watch a drama about some of the problems that I have. It's just going to be too weird. But I can watch a zombie going through the same problem, right? And so I think that that's the kind of thing that I see, that I talk about, where it's healthy and happy. It makes me happy and healthy because I find my tribe. I'm cool with myself. I have a sense of play. I have an outlet for the stuff that's pent up in me. If you have those things, that's a pretty damn good life.
Yeah, I got a really nice compliment from a listener a few weeks ago, and I won't read it because it's about you, not me, but it just made me think, well, what you just said made me think about that. She said, I'm very, very thankful to have found your podcast, and I found my peer group, which, horror, why does it have this kind of little, I think it's way less than it was when I was a kid, but
Sure.
this sort of stigma about it. I can remember being in a video store when I was like 17, 18 and thinking, I hope nobody I know, sees me in the horror section, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. We
Which
were
is pretty
one
dumb
step
when you think
above.
about it, but
Yeah, it's one step above softcore porn, right?
Right.
And so everybody was like, you hide your horror stuff like you would hide your porn stash. I think there's a couple different reasons. I think, and they all kind of blend together in one way. But one of the reasons is that art for a long time was always in service of theater, right? It all really starts with the theater, and then when we start to photograph, it becomes about film. But film was always the bastard child of theater, and then TV was a bastard son of film. They were always subservient to how the artists the directors and the critics thought of theater. And for some reason, when we get to theater, there is this idea that even though all genres are basically born from Shakespeare, that there is a lower case kind of thing to genre ideas, that it's a lower standard. So when we get to theater, or when we get to film, the film actors and the directors and everything like that are kind of embarrassed, first off, to be in motion pictures, but also there's this idea that art is high-minded. And I think that that's finally falling apart because most of the old guard are dying. The Andrew Sarrises are dead. The Pauline Kaels are dead. All these people who unconsciously were continuing to have a prejudice that they were taught when they were young and in college, that these movies are great and these movies are not. And so often when you take a look, especially if you're someone like me who gets to meet the old school actors, you know, many of them mocked the movies that they were in until they started finding out how many people were truly into them. But there was always this thing that, oh my God, I'm slumming when I'm doing these kind of deals. And where that, I think, gets all of its energy is that people always feel that there's an exploitive piece to horror, like exploitation is something that can only be negative, that it's not truly drawing out emotions. I think it's the idea we don't want to look at certain emotions. And I think some people believe that some emotions are bad. And it's like, no, all emotions are just emotions. Your responses of the emotions are what can be good or bad, but all emotions are viable. And people feel that you're trafficking in the dark emotions only. And to me, I think that trafficking in the dark emotions is important. I think if you go all the way back to Campbell's stories about the dark forest, we go into the dark forest. We need to go in there to find our shadow. We get to become the hero's journey. At the end, we get on the other side of that forest. And I think that it is something that needs to happen. We get our empathy from going through the struggles that are there. And so I think that it's an old school thing that makes art form that was already considered somewhat bastardized, film and cinema. It makes itself feel more like high art by sitting there saying, well, there are different degrees. You know, I hate the idea of the term genre in the first place. Nobody says drama genre. They're like, well, that's ridiculous. Well, drama is just a story. It's nothing different than the other genres that are out there. It just has a different styling of how it's going to go. It's like music. There are different forms of music. And I think horror and music are very, very similar because neither of those art forms demand that you have an intellectual thought around them while you're listening or experiencing them. You feel all the intellectual stuff afterwards. The first thing that it does is it gets past this thing, your brain, and goes right for the gut, right for the energy. A song can in one chord change your mood, and I think a horror film can change it with one scene. One paragraph in a book can change your mood, and it depends on which direction you decide to go, but it is always embracing the emotion. Horror is the only genre that is named after an emotion, so it is all about that. And I think the thing about art is that if we're really honest about art, all art works this way. When you go into an art studio and you're looking at a painting, the docent will come up, or if you're going to a gallery, the guy who's trying to sell the painting will come up, and he doesn't start asking you about your credentials in art theory. The first thing he asks you is, how does this make you feel? Because we all know that how we feel, how we connect to things is important, good, bad, and different on what the art is. How do we feel about it? And that is what I think makes horror very pure. You can look at the intellectual later, but the thing for me is that art can survive without having a strong theme of logic to it, but it cannot survive without emotional connection. If you don't have emotional connection, there's nothing there. And so I think that now we're at a place where the geeks have inherited the earth. More's the pity, perhaps. Right. But because of that, the slings and arrows that we had as kids, where just saying that you're a horror person, they thought you were really weird and a mouth breather and knuckle dragger, that has kind of changed. When you have the fine invisible line between high art and pop art disappear, You have things like the Marvel universe where people are talking about Infinity Wars like it's Godfather 2. You now have this thing where it's okay to review the things that are full of allegory and metaphor. And that's where I think horror lives very snugly. It lives with allegory and metaphor.
And I don't want people to get the impression your book, Screaming for Pleasure, is just about this, because
Right.
I'm quoting, rare insights about some of the greatest fright directors of all time, Cronenberg, Del Toro, John Carpenter, an in-depth look, at the most impactful horror films by women directors, plus a list of over 15 women directors you should be watching now. Relive the most terrifying and shocking moments in horror film history, and so forth.
It's good blurb stuff.
Yeah, well, talk about the insights. Talk a little bit about that without, giving away the whole book, of course. But
well, the
insights
book
into
really,
the directors,
Yeah, the thing that I'll say is that this is a love letter to everything that goes creepy crawly, and what I really talk about here is a little bit of my personal experience, how horror had affected my life, and then the books and things which really excited me. But I also talk about how horror can't help but affect the culture, and the culture can't help but affect our horror stories. I don't think that it matters whether it's conscious or unconscious. I think if you're dealing in something like horror, you are keeping your ear to the ground on what's happening in the world. And I think you can see it if you really look at like eras of film. You can see what really scares us. I basically say that if you want to find out what people were really nervous about in any decade, take a look at their exploitation films. Take a look at their horror films, the B-movie ones, the ones that were in drive-ins, because those guys lived and died on pushing the button that was going to either get you to put down your ticket in outrage or put down your ticket in curiosity. And so they are unfettered looks at what we were worried about. And it goes all the way back to like the silent films. There was a time in silent film history where there were white slavery films. Like there were a whole batch of those, because what was happening was the cities were getting huge and they were also getting very urban, shall we say. And because of the diversity that was happening there was a lot of fear of what would happen to you if you went to cities. So there were a ton of these movies where a nice, obviously Swedish descent girl goes into the big city and then becomes a slave. And those movies disappeared after a while. They had about a decade of everybody being so worried about that. And then suddenly there's nothing. There's the whole idea of drugs, marijuana doing all sorts of things to people. That lasts for a little bit. And you even have things like ugly laws that were in the United States. And that was right after the Civil War and continued until after World War I, where if you were missing an arm or you were blind or any form of disability, you weren't allowed to come out during the day because you would scare the kids and everything like that. It was a way for communities to keep panhandling down as well. And during that time where there's people that have, ceramic faces and stuff like that, lo and behold, we have Lon Chaney, the man of 1,000 faces, who makes a pretty good living off of a guy who's wearing a mask, who's deformed underneath. And he also has armless characters, legless characters, all sorts of stuff in his pantheon. And that is happening during a time when we are we're just having this psychic knockdown from World War I, where so many people are destroyed, people with mustard gas in their lungs, they can't breathe correctly. So we are watching like the actual, horrors of war walking down the street. And what we decided to do was like push that to the corner or make them the other, which is what you see in a lot of the horror movies at that time. So when we're talking about, different directors, it's what era are we looking at? What were they talking about? What was it that excited them? I think that like Carpenter, one of the things that I love about Carpenter is the thing that is the most boring about Carpenter, which is, the whole Halloween idea. Everybody knows Halloween. Halloween is so out of his hands at this point. It has become a franchise. It has become a marketing tool. It has become what is behind me right now. As much as I'm saying terrible things about Michael Myers, or The Shape, as I like to talk about it, I have 4 Aurora model kit Universal monsters here. We get that because these things get commodified. For 1 decade, when we're dealing with like the Depression, these monsters are talking for the people, right? These are all the people who are spurned. You have the aristocrat that's sucking off of the poor. You have all these wonderful things that are in the background from these universal guys. And now that's what's happened. Once it gets past its moment where it is truly hitting on the soft spots, the sore spots of the community, they then become beloved characters. And I think we have this weird thing right now of where Michael Myers is this deal. But what I love is the idea of the shape, which is from the first film. And I do make a distinction. I make a distinction like for Nightmare on Elm Street, there's Fred Krueger in the first one. And then the other movies, he's Freddy. And in all those other movies, he's wisecracking. But in the first one, that is a guy who molested and killed children, and he's just living in the dreams of people, and he is a revenge monster. And that guy is completely different than the other films. There's very little that yeah, there's very little in that movie that is slapsticky. And when we look at Michael Myers, the first movie, he's the shape. You know, and I think the first movie is this great thing where Carpenter realized that horror needed a kick in the ass. And I think that he also realized that, you know, movies of the week and all this stuff, everything was being defined for you. I think horror is at its best, which is what Lovecraft said, the fear of the unknown, right? So as we keep things
100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah, the more we keep it unknown, the better the story is. And so Carpenter came up with this idea, and he had worked with Dan O'Bannon, and I think at one point him and Toby Hooper were kind of flipping coins on whether or not they were going to do Texas Chainsaw or this weird idea that you have about some guy chasing after teenagers that has no face. And so what Carpenter was trying to do at that point was take away everything. It's almost like a Rorschach test. It's almost like the Kuleshov effect, if you know what that is, which is an editing style that you just have this guy blank face, and then you put up a picture of a tombstone, put up a picture of boiling water, and a picture of a crying baby. And the guy's face is expressionless. But as you edit this stuff, the story either shows up like, oh, the mother died and the child's hungry and he has no food, or the baby died and he's committing suicide. Whatever it is, it changes with the editing, which means that the audience is giving all of the information. And what Carpenter did is he had the audience give all the fear and all the nastiness to Michael Myers, the shape. So the shape is this wonderful thing where, to me, the original Halloween is the birth of myth. We get to see a myth. I wish there was never a second film, because if we didn't, and even if I like the second film, I wish there wasn't a second film, because to me, sequels hate what they love. You know, they kill what they love, because we want more and more information. The more information we get, the less we're in Lovecraft's world of the unknown. And what I love about this movie, where we have the shape, Carpenter intentionally took away everything. So he's wearing garage coveralls so that there's no name, nothing. There's nothing that's stylish. There's nothing that says of a time. It is something that is completely sleek and it's gray. And he wanted to have a mask. And the first idea was a clown, everybody knows. But the idea of spray painting that completely white and having him just stand there comes all the way from the movie The Innocents. You know, there's a spot where the ghosts just kind of stand. He decides to do that because he realized that there was something truly terrifying there.
Might this have to do a lot with the Uncanny Valley as well? What he was doing?
Of course. I completely think there's Uncanny Valley in that. Yeah. And I think that it works so well. So the first film is all about mystery, sets up this little myth. We see someone go from being a human being to an implausibility, right? That he becomes the very myth that everybody's been talking about. They keep that house. Nobody buys that house. It's just a haunted house that everybody comes. Lonnie keeps coming up to. You know, all of these things are happening. And in the end, he literally becomes this myth. And we see, even though it was just an editing tool to end the movie somehow, the idea that we just see these shots of everywhere that he's been, but we don't see the shape in any of those frames, is a terribly unsettling way to end that film. And I think that Carpenter was on to something where there was just too much explanation going on. And he did this, of course, just to make money. But I don't think that is an excuse. And so the other way around, people tend to talk like, oh, well, Romero didn't intentionally have a black man in the front. Yeah, shut the fuck up. The thing is that he did. And that is where instead of changing the dialogue or coming up with something else, Romero just let it happen in the way that it did. And we read everything in there because it was there. Whether or not he intentionally put it there or not, you don't make movies in a vacuum. Especially 1968. That's
Right.
kind of a crazy, tumultuous time. It'd be really, there's nothing more political than someone telling me that, oh, that movie is just a movie, that it's all it is a monster and a guy eating things. It's always going to be about something.
Yeah.
How important that is, or how skillfully you do it, is what we love or hate. You know, if you have your message right here on the forehead, that's kind of boring. But I think there's always informing what's going on. And so, you know, Carpenter has come on and said that he apologizes for ending the sexual revolution with Halloween, because he thinks that so many people read into that movie that sex was death, right? And so you have Carpenter inadvertently talking about the idea of promiscuous sex in that time in the late 70s. We're having a lot of disillusionment with the hippie generation, the disco generation, all that stuff. And so he may or may not have actually wanted to do that, but that's the stuff that ends up becoming the template for slashers. What's the big template for slashers? You know, if you have sex, you're going to die, right?
Right.
And so
that's what Scream makes fun of, is all these rules. You know?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I think it's funny that that happens, but I also think that it does speak to stuff. I mean, I don't think there's a shock that you have in 68, you have Night of the Living Dead, you have Rosemary's Baby, and you have Targets, you know, three really strange and different movies. But each one of those is talking about a problem that was happening at that time. You know, you have the lone gunman in Targets. You have the idea of body autonomy, because the Equal Rights Amendment and stuff like that is going on during the time of Rosemary's Baby. And Night of the Living Dead, you've got turmoil. Do we believe in our government anymore? We are under siege. And so you have the idea of two different Americas kind of coming together, one eating the other, and it almost feels inevitable in that film. So I think that there's, you know, shit like that is going on all the time. And I think Carpenter is a really interesting director because he worked in all of the different genres, but he brought most of it back to a genre which he may not have necessarily been his first love, horror. And in that, he's able to be this bridge. I think the thing that was really interesting about Carpenter is my dad liked Carpenter, right? He had seen Assault on Precinct 13. He had seen Halloween. He had seen The Fog. He was like, wow, this guy is like an old school guy. But at the same time, he had this sensibility that brought young guys like me, and he was hip. He had, you know, people were having sex, people were drinking and smoking. They talked like me. They had a cynicism that my dad's movies didn't have. And he had this very interesting bridge, which I think worked very well for him until his greatest movie, The Thing, where he lost my dad completely. My dad felt that that was like an insult, like a direct stab in his childhood when that movie came out. And yet I think that Carpenter is one of the better stylist directors. He does minimalism really cool. He has the right influences. Howard Hawks would do these crazy movies where there'd be like 20 guys in one shot. Boom, you know, Carpenter ends up doing that stuff. Nobody's doing it at that time. He has a very old school idea of how to put the camera in places, done with a new mindset. So I hope that's what you were asking.
Yeah.
Because I'll just keep talking. Better stop me.
Pete has
Drug
thoughts
dart.
on Assault on Precinct 13, don't you?
I do. I'm surprised you remember.
No,
But
I do.
Assault on Precinct 13, and I think who is it? Paul Tremblay and John Langan both agree with me.
Yeah.
Nice.
The Tremblay.
That Assault on Precinct 13 is one of the world's best zombie films.
Oh yes. Yep. When it came out, I think who was it? Village Voice. Whoever the writer was for the Village Voice. He was like Carpenter's biggest supporter. He was the guy that changed everything for Halloween. Originally, that had terrible reviews. But when he went back to Assault on Precinct 13, he said this movie should play with Night of the Living Dead. They're very much the same film.
Yeah, it's just this mindless attack against a building.
And the Rio Bravo. right?
Yeah.
And it's all Rio Bravo, but which is cool.
Speaking of our friend Paul, just as an aside, I want everybody to know he's going to come back on the show. He wanted to wait until after the movie came out, and I said, "Yeah, that's a great idea." So we're going to have him on. Yeah, that one. Knock at the Cabin, based on Cabin at the End of the World, or adapted from. So we'll have him on February 12th after the movie's been out about a week or so, I think.
Yeah. Well, so, tell him I said hello, and I can't say, and I talk about Cabin all the time.
You guys, are you a friend of Paul's too, or you guys know?
No.
Okay.
Never met him. Never met him. But I champion his book. Yeah, I champion his book. I'm going to be at a convention on Wednesday in Tucson, and we're doing a panel about monsters as metaphors. And I'm going to be talking about Cabin because I think there's so much great stuff. I love how that movie.
Is that going to be recorded?
Or that book. I don't know. It probably will be, and it'll be behind a paywall. It's a small science fiction horror.
If you have a recording of it, yeah, Paul would love to listen to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, but, I think it's one of the great novels, horror novels that I've read in a long time. That and Lauren Bucus's Broken Monsters, which I think is an excellent, superb one as well.
Well, while we're on the subject, speaking of what you were talking about a few minutes ago of horror and real fears, his book Disappearance at Devil's Rock, about what's a parent's worst nightmare.
Yeah, right.
Their kids missing. So
yeah, and that's something that is a styling of horror story that goes all the way back to, I think somebody had written something about Little Red Riding Hood, and I would say that Hansel and Gretel is one of these templates that talks about a parent's worst fear, and it's a huge cautionary tale, right? It's a cautionary tale that works both for the adult and for the child. And there's one of my favorite horror movies that people don't think is a horror movie is Picnic at Hanging Rock. And Peter Weir's story of that, if you have not seen that, it's based on a true story. And it happened, I think it was I want to say it was the early 1900s. In Australia, a group of girls at a girls' school go up in the mountains or this mountain peak kind of thing that's in the Aboriginal area, and they go up and they never come down, and it's never explained. And the rest of the movie,
at Devil's Rock, I know from talking with him, partly inspired by, and Paul wears his influences on his sleeve.
That is actually a great movie, not
it's fantastic,
completely eerie.
Yeah, thoroughly. I look at it as it's horror as M.R. James is horror, as someone like Algernon Blackwood is horror,
right.
Where the weird is right there, and supernatural isn't demonic or anything like that. Super is just nature at a level that we're not ready to deal with.
The last
at
wave.
Some point. Yeah, The Last Wave, right? So Peter Weir had some really great movies that are around that. And yeah, I brought up Picnic because that's kind of how I felt. That was they were kissing cousins in their own way. And I think that's wonderful. I love the idea that people go insane when they cannot explain what's going on. We need an explanation.
Oh, what's very so Lovecraftian idea.
Oh yeah, exactly. If you can't figure it out, like I love Guillermo del Toro talked about Lovecraft many a decade ago, and he had said the elder gods are these great beasts that are thoroughly indifferent to our existence. And so it's not even, there's no nemesis whatsoever. We are the bramble on their robe when they're walking through the woods. We are insignificant to what the elder gods are doing, but we see the story of the ant when we're at a picnic, right, and we're stamping down. And I think that is an exquisite way to tell a story. And I think that some of my favorite stuff is where you can't, it's not explained and it's just there. And because we can't grasp an answer, things start to fall apart, like Picnic and Hanging Rock.
I have a horror writer friend by the name of Scott Thomas. Talking about Elmer James and all that, I would love for you to read couple of his books and email me and say, hey, I see what you mean. I like that. He's got a lot of books. One's called The Sea of Ash. And the other one I want to refer to is Over the Darkening Fields. Now, The Sea of Ash is a novella.
Great name.
Yeah, Over the
Great
Darkening
name.
Fields is a short story collection. Now, the reason why I bring him up to you just now, besides he deserves to be a lot more famous than he is, his mantra is kind of his mantra is explain nothing, and he does it so well. There's a story in Over the Darkening Fields. It's quite a short story, and it's called Winter Census, and it's basically about a big city in the dead of winter, snow, temperatures at 0, that kind of thing. And he's working with a homeless shelter and city programs to go out on these nights and for the homeless people and see if we can help in some way. Can we get them inside? Can we bring them a blanket? What can we do? All that sort of thing. If I remember correctly, but that's sort of their mission, help the homeless. And then that night, just these eerie things happen and Scott ends it. So, he's like, basically the protagonist is saying, this is what happened. I can't fucking explain it, but it was just scary and eerie as shit. And I love that because it's still unknown, which is what you're talking about.
Yes.
The first, this is the first time I heard these ideas. Maybe not these guys, but for me, that the first movie, Nightmare on Elm Street, Fred Krueger, the first Halloween, how different they are from the other films. And prior to talking to you just now, I never really considered Halloween 2, at least, to be all that different from the first one, but I can see exactly what you're saying. It explains more. That's the problem.
Yeah, the whole thing of bringing up Sam Hain, not Samhain, but Sam Hain, and there have to be related. It's like this Empire Strikes Back kind of revelation. It worked for people who love that, who wish to have the story continue. I understand that for a lot of people, serialized stories are very important. We don't get Sherlock Holmes if it's just one book, right? He becomes an institution because there's a multitude of books that come out and they're all really fun. So I get that there's a point for it, but for me, horror tends to be killed by sequels. And
yeah, but in something
about
like Sherlock Holmes, the more you explain, the more familiar you are with him and Watson, the better and the sweeter it is. You see more of this friendship. You get to live in their world some more. But it's the opposite of the horror. Explaining more in something but like Sherlock Holmes is, you're like, oh great, I get to hang out with these guys again.
Yeah, it's like I have people who argue with me about this because saying that you don't really appreciate sequels is a very incendiary thing to say in the horror community. And so I'll have people argue with me and they'll go, what, you don't like movies? I like those movies because it's comfortable and it's like soup. I said, then go eat some fucking soup. That's not what horror is here for. Horror is not here to share half of its sandwich with you at recess. It is here to be that dark thing, right? It is.
That should be your slogan. I love that.
My slogan, yeah. So I mean, there are reasons that horror is horror, right?
Right.
And everything has a purpose. And to me, the idea is that we should always be off balance when we're watching something. I think we should. I live for the surprise. It's not about being scared, right? We've seen these movies so often that we're not going to be scared. In fact, if you watch a movie twice, it's no longer for the fear; it's for the thrill. We change something, we diffuse it when we have that thing of the unknown finally disappear. And I think it's important for horror to continue to have that surprise. I'm looking for surprise like I do in comedies. Comedy and horror are not the same, but at the same point, they do have this one thing that I think is so important to both, which is the element of surprise. And if we take that surprise away, great. You can have that, but I'm kind of grumpy about it because I prefer you to try and come up with something that feels a little bit more shocking or surprising for me, because that's the entertainment value that I'm looking for, which is specific to horror.
Pete, I think you wanted to add something.
So there was a recent editorial from someone that came out in response to Hocus Pocus 2. And the basic premise of the editorial was, can we please make Halloween and horror scary again?
I think it
we
has
need-
two sides. I mean, there's more than one audience, right?
Oh yeah.
Sorry, Pete, go ahead.
No, but the point of this article is that Halloween has become almost a safe place, a safe space, and it's not supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, I think mainstream, there is that. And I think it's always been there. I mean, we're going back to, Vincent Price being on the Muppets, right? And even earlier than that, you would have shows where they defanged, quote unquote, Bela Lugosi, have him on vaudeville acts and things like that. Whatever it could be, they were always doing that since World War II, really. World War II, we decide that there's a real monster out there. And all of a sudden, all these scary guys behind me, the Universal monsters, start being in comedies, because from then on, these guys aren't scary. There's always
they can't
been
hold
this
a candle to the fact that we can now destroy the entire world.
Right, exactly. And then we get Godzilla out of that. We get giant ants out of that. So we find a way to work around that anxiety. But I think you're onto something there, Peter. But what I would also say is that we are not in the same world that we were in before. There are multiple tributaries. When I was growing up, I loved slashers for the first 2 years. And then after that, I was like, please give me a supernatural fucking movie. Everything was a slasher at the time, right? You could find supernatural if you really dug for it. But these days, there are so many different tributaries. I mean, horror is like the Nile. There are a million little rivers that are feeding this bad boy. And a lot of that is just the idea of streaming coming in, the accessibility. For me, I used to have to champion movies that I had never seen. I fell in love with movies over 5 stills, or in the book that Peter McCarty, I can't remember his first name, the cult film books. There were 5 photos. I fell in love with the movie on 5 photos. I fetishized those until I finally got to see them, because movies were not shown all the time, and if they were shown, they were edited. So we now have this time where if somebody wants to hear about Ray Dennis Steckler, they can look up Ray Dennis Steckler. There's a box set of Ray Dennis Steckler movies. I mean, there's stuff like that that's out there. So I say that there's a horror movie for everyone. You just have to look, and you don't have to like all of them. There are people now watching Asian horror, Korean horror movies with subtitles. That never happened unless you were a weirdo like me. You'd have to go in, like, I grew up outside of Philadelphia. I'd have to go to Philadelphia to find a video like that, and nobody else would want to watch it.
Where outside Philadelphia?
Oh, I was actually up north. I was in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. So I say Philadelphia because nobody knows where the fuck Hazleton is.
So you make this point, and it's so a couple of weeks ago, at the beginning of October, my kid and I sat down and we watched Quarantine. And she's like, okay, that's pretty good. And I said, but it's based on a Spanish film that I think is much scarier.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, well, I'll show that to my friends on Halloween night, and we'll watch that. That's a good comfort film. So they were watching Wreck downstairs. They screamed through that entire film. Even though they knew what was coming, because Quarantine did it one way, Wreck does it a completely different way.
Absolutely.
It's the same story. But Wreck just did it so much better. But amazing, but it's subtitled in Spanish.
Yeah. It's amazing what Quarantine has done, by the way. I think horror has often saved things. Like 1931, we're 2 years into the Great Depression. Nobody has any money. Some reason Carl Laemmle Jr. decides, I'm going to make a film adaptation out of a stage play and a 100-year-old book, that there have already been 2 silent films that have made that were tanked, that did nothing. But you know what? It's time for another Frankenstein. Makes Frankenstein in the middle of a depression. There are movies about pennies from heaven. They're making comedies, they're doing all this stuff to try and save studios. The movie that saves them was 2 movies, saves Universal. Frankenstein and Dracula both come out in 1931. It spoke to what people needed at that time. And it saved Universal. And the idea of monsters kind of came and saved Hollywood one time. And it did it several other times. And when streaming first came out, horror movies kept streaming afloat. I had a lot of friends who were filmmakers who were actually making a little bit of money for once by having their low budget films on Amazon for people to actually stream. And then when Amazon started making money and had their own studio and got Oscar nominations, all of a sudden they all got cut out. They said, your quality is not up to our standards. So this happens often. And what happened in the middle of the pandemic? Well, Hollywood stops making movies, period. But there's all these horror movies that are sitting on shelves. All these horror movies all across the world. And boom, they're grabbing them, they're putting them on, and people watched. And then all of a sudden,
the ones about pandemics they're watching, you know.
Oh yeah, they watch about pandemics. They watched about, what I love is that they're watching, and something that I can go on about, so I'll try not to, is I think what interests me, like people ask me, oh, you must love zombie movies. They talk about the pandemic. I said, no, I'm sick to death of zombie films. I would have never thought that would ever happen to me, because in 1985, there was one zombie movie and I championed George Miller for actually making it. And now it's the all-purpose metaphor. But what I'm interested in is that we are watching pandemic movies about the effects of what the pandemic has done and how our minds got warped. You know, we had 2020 was the first year since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution where we had to stop and have time for introspection. And we went fucking insane. We attacked every institution that we had. We came up with conspiracy theories. We stormed castles. All this craziness. We did not go inward. We went outward with our madness. We did not know how to deal with the time that we are allowed to have introspection. And you'll see that in movies and documentaries that have been coming out. I think that there's a movie called Synchronic, which is by the Benson and
Moorhead.
And it's all about, you know, New Orleans EMTs who are burnt out, paramedics who are coming, and they're having to save people who are overdosing, and some people are coming back with these weird axes sticking out of them because the drug that they're taking, Synchronic, takes them out of synchronicity with time. And they go back in time and they go forward in time. A great idea, but it's also a pandemic movie. It's talking about first responders. First responders are your main characters. Talking about burnout. They're talking about New Orleans, which not only had a flood, but then just makes it back to have this double whammy of now having a pandemic close everything again. The drug use that goes up, the alcohol use that goes up, and the idea that we're not in time anymore. We're just kind of floating. We floated for like 2 years, not sure what day it is. Synchronic talks all about that. Saint Maud, a movie about a nurse who believes that she's doing good, the work of God, and that she's been talked to. Man, talk about how people can respond to patterns and take it to where it makes them important. That's what you see in that movie. There are so many movies that talk about how we are disconnected from the world now. I don't need to hear about a disease. I don't need to hear about the bug that's in the air. The thing that I think is interesting is that we've had documentaries about how you can't trust documentaries. We've had documentaries about the hotel in LA. The girl in the elevator. You had the one about the son of Sam. My stepfather might have been the son of Sam. All these documentaries feed you the thing of, oh my God, we're going to learn something new, only at the end to say, hey, this was not real. This was, we all blew it out of proportion. We saw connections where there were no connections.
You know,
documentaries suddenly became cautionary tales.
In Walden, Thoreau says, I love a broad margin to my life. And he goes on to describe sometimes just, you know, standing in the doorway and just drifting off and thinking for an hour or two. And he ends the paragraph by saying something to the effect of, this was not time taken away from my life, but, you know, added to it. But I don't think a lot of people can handle that broad margin. Some people, they really need it. Like I need that. I can't be busy all the time. But you're right. A lot of people went absolutely nuts when they had nothing to do. And I was going to ask you, so so what are people afraid of today, or what's driving, you know, the horror movies for the last couple of years? And I think to a large degree, you've already answered it. You know, this,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think if I was going to say what I think everybody's afraid of, and it's interesting, I'll give a little story of my own after it, is that
absolutely.
I think people are afraid of being wrong. I think
Mhm.
at this point, people have so much invested in a belief system or a mindset or a spirit, whatever it might be. We're at a weird point where it's almost like liar's poker. Sooner or later, we've all got to say what we've got in our hands. And I
So
think the
sunk cost
fear,
theory you're talking about?
yeah, the fear of being wrong, you know, and what happened with me is I was born into a cult, and or not born into it. It happened when I was about
Yeah, I wanted to
6.
ask you about that.
Yeah, so I was part of a cult that believed that the world was going to end in 1975, and as fuck, they were wrong, and we had the bicentennial anyway. But the thing that was intriguing uh, and disturbing in my life was that I was told all of these things about demons being right next to me, that waiting to corrupt me, and that the government was in cahoots with the devil. And my friends, even though they're wonderful people to me, they're actually corpses walking unless you can save them and have them come to this one true religion. And in a cult, you just basically, your entire world is that worldview. Everybody that you know has that worldview, and they've turned everybody else into the other, and they're tainted. Those poor folks don't even know they're tainted. They're being lied to by this Babylon the Great, you know, and all of this strange shit. And so, you know, I'm sniffing this all over right now. I'm like, oh, I know everything that's going on in the culture right now. We are all having these cults. But, you know, I said 1975, they said the world was going to end. I didn't believe on January 1st, 1976. God, mom, and dad lied. But everybody else just went along with it. And they kept going. My dad is still in it. This thing still exists. And it has more people now because they took out the time and said, well, any time now, we were wrong. You know, our numerology was off. Somewhere in the abacus, we put the wrong God in there or whatever. So we had the wrong time. But the reality is, it's going to happen. The end of the world's coming. Sooner or later, we're going to be right. A broken clock is right 2 times a day. Whatever you want to say. But they're still in it. And I'm like, how could you be in it? You stopped paying taxes. You didn't take surgeries. You didn't take dental work, all this stuff because the end was coming and the end didn't come. And now you're left holding all of this and you still give support to the person who was wrong and put you through that. How do you
Well,
do that?
as
And the
my
reality.
as my friends here know, I know what you're talking about more than you know.
Right.
My family joined the cult when I was 6. It was
Mm,
1977, but it was exactly like that.
yeah. It
You
was,
know, what you're talking about, and everybody else is the other,
yeah.
and
The
it's
time it
it's
was
hard to
militarized.
describe, really.
Yeah, it is so weird and it still twists me, right? Every
Yeah,
so often I realize that there's deviance in my life that comes from this weird response to this other world that I was living in. But the thing that I guess I was getting to was
yeah.
all these people, it's kind of like you know, trying to do reparations for past atrocities in the United States. It is so much easier to just believe because to say that you are wrong, there is so much psychic nightmare that
You
you
have
would
to
have
admit how
to,
much time you've wasted if you say you're
yeah.
wrong.
Not only that, how many people you've hurt,
Yeah.
how many of your beliefs, how far back does it go? How much of what you believe is just wish fulfillment and not reality?
Yeah, this
And
is
it's,
exactly the description of sunk cost theory. I've sunk so much into this that I can't allow it. I can't allow myself to be wrong. It's
yeah,
got to
and
be right.
I think that's where we are now. So that what people are afraid of now is finding out that they are wrong. Like when I left that religion, I left it, or well, I ran away from home finally, and joined the military because I wasn't going to go to college. They had me. I had to live in their house, so I had to do all this stuff whether I believed in it or not. And
Right.
when I left, I was like those Amish kids. I had no defenses against the world. I had no concept of the reality of the world. All I knew was the vice, right? And so you do all the stupid shit and nearly
Man,
kill
Scott, if
yourself.
you only knew how much I'm like nodding inside in agreement, not knowing
Yeah,
anything about the world, It's like you
Yeah.
grew up on another planet and now you're
Yeah.
exploring
No
Earth.
wonder I was so twisted, and no wonder people looked at me so weirdly. It's astonishing that I had friends at that time, because somehow they saw something that was there. But the thing is, I still had deep down in me, and another reason why I loved horror was because of the gothicness of my life. My life was like a gothic horror novel. And so it made sense. Halloween made sense. Everybody believed, like I believed, one day out of the year that monsters walk the earth. And then I'm an adult and I no longer believe in many of these things. I'm kind of an atheist and all this stuff, but demons still scare me.
Have you ever
Deep
read
down.
Matt Carden? He talks a lot about the intersection of religion and horror. You just
Ooh,
made me think of him right now. He's got a book, his latest book,
you
which
need a
here it
list.
is.
Hopefully you're going to have a list of these things at the end, because you've mentioned other writers and I'm on,
I
right? So I'm not
actually
going to sit here and go, excuse me while I type this
no, in
out.
the show notes I'm gonna have your book, and I usually do a little TBR. Here's if you just pick up one Matt
Ha!
Carden book, do this
What
one.
the demon said.
And
Oh my God.
it's all of his so far, his fiction, or excuse me, his nonfiction, um which is his essays on horror, fiction, film, and philosophy. Had him on the show a couple months ago. He's fascinating to read and talk to. I really think you'd enjoy this. What
Yeah,
the
that's,
Damon Said, Daemon, Demon Said,
yeah.
by
Is he
Matt
British?
Carden. No, he's American.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah.
interesting
So-
that he has that spelling.
Yeah. Yeah, Pete.
Everyone here has seen The Beautiful Mind.
Yes.
A Beautiful Mind. Long
Yeah.
time ago.
All right. So Nash, the guy who's at the center of this, his big theory is game theory as applied to economics and business. And his idea is that you don't actually have to be the biggest, brightest, smartest, most wealthy person at the table. You just have to convince everybody else
Right.
that you are.
As if. Act as if.
Exactly. I mean,
Right.
look at us.
Yeah.
So-
Here's the World War I flying ace ready to get on his Sopwith camel. That's my life.
Right. So the idea is that you can bluff. And as long as nobody nobody calls your bluff, you're fine. But the moment somebody calls your bluff, and this is what his theory says, not only do you come down, but everybody who surrounded you comes tumbling down with you.
Yeah.
So this is what happens with Enron. And
Yes.
banks go out of business because Enron turned out to be bluffing.
Mm-hmm.
And they all believed him. But this ties directly back to your idea of saying, I'm wrong.
Right. Yeah. And it has an opposing side, which is like when I grew up, I still had this fear of demons. I used to have a recurring nightmare that I'd be in an apartment and I'd be playing music on my stereo. That's how old this thing is. So I would be walking over because all of a sudden the record skipped or it's time to change it. And all of a sudden the lights would just dim a little bit. I would suddenly be scared, and an ottoman or something, a blanket on the couch would just suddenly fly and get on top of me, and it's a demon on top of that, and it's laughing in my ear and has me to the ground. And my fear in that is I was wrong. After all of this, after this insane cult that I was in, and they were bluffing and all this stuff, holy shit, I'm still wrong. I was wrong. And what happens to me is I am now enslaved to this thing. And so that's the horror that has always been in my life, is that what if I'm wrong? And I think now we have this cultural thing where we have gone past the line of normalcy in stating our opinion. We have really crossed the line. We've put the red card up. We have declared ourselves, whatever it is that we've declared. And we may have been pushed by someone else who was doing that, whatever it is. The reactionary world that we're in right now, the biggest fear is that everything that we believe is wrong, that maybe there is a matrix, or, oh my God, I believed in a matrix this whole time. This was a simulation. And now I know that the guy who first came up with that made $1 billion and is actually a non-believer. And here I am exposed to the world as a gullible fool who has lost everything. I think the idea that our thoughts could be wrong in such a way that we feel that the world is so insane. It's almost like horror movie universe where everything is wrong. Like Dirty Harry is a horror movie because it's a horror movie universe. Nothing in that movie works. The courts don't work. The police doesn't work. Nothing works. Only Dirty Harry works. There's even a scene in that movie where there's a guy ready to commit suicide and the firefighter's like, I don't know what to do. There's a guy up on the roof. And good old Dirty Harry off duty goes up there and somehow gets that guy. Most of that movie is shot around midnight. It's in San Francisco, and they never show any of the normal stuff that you see in San Francisco. It's alleys. 3/4 of that movie is shot in darkness. He's going after a serial killer, and in the end of that movie, the line of morality switches, but it doesn't switch by the bad guy. It's who we thought was the good guy the whole time. He moves the line towards evil, to attack evil, and he throws his badge away. The idea is that a horror movie universe is where the world is so insane that there's only one answer, and it's an answer you normally wouldn't go for in polite company or in your real world. But because the world's so insane, Dirty Harry is the only thing that makes sense. Him doing what he does makes sense. The Joker is another movie that has that. Cabinet Dr. Caligari is another that has that. And so
it reminds me of a line from Robert Zelazny's Corwin of Amber, where he says,
I love these quotes.
Thanks. Well, he says, I sometimes think of myself as an evil that exists to expunge greater evils, or something to that effect. Yeah. It's a great line.
Yeah, I love the line from Breakfast of Champions, where basically Bunny or not Bunny, I'm trying to remember the main character in that, thinks that everybody's a robot. And, you know, when he sees Bunny being beaten up, or he's beating Bunny up, his son, he's like, well, I'm just a robot whose purpose, the program, is to beat people up. And my program is to bite the hand of Kilgore Trout and take his thumb. You know, all of that weird stuff. The idea
I found the quote, since you like this quote. Sorry to interrupt. In the hall of many judgments, my hands are the color of blood. I sometimes fancy myself an evil which exists to oppose other evils. And on that great day of which the prophets speak, but in which they do not truly believe, on the day the world is utterly cleansed of evil, then I too will go down into darkness, swallowing curses. Until then, I will not wash my hands nor let them hang useless. So, not quite on point, but you made me think of it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I like that. So yeah, I guess that's a super, super long answer to what are people afraid of these days.
Well, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
Last but not least, because I know we could talk to you for hours about this stuff, and I would love to get you back on the show and do that. But I think last but not least, in your flyer here, talk about a chapter on female writers and directors that created a brand new tension. His chapter on how female writers and directors have created a brand new tension in the genre is worthy of lengthy discussion all its own. So talk about that a little bit. I think that's a great way to end this.
Okay, to quickly encapsulate the thing that I think we're seeing now, which I think is fantastic. There are a lot of groups that have been marginalized by horror that are finally getting their voice, and I think women in horror, movies that have been made, writer, director of horror films, is we're seeing the same kind of tension, but we're seeing it from a different perspective. The lens is just different. One of the things that I talked about was my awakening to this. I mean, I had so many blinders, and horror drops them because I just want to see everything. But I went to a film festival, and it was during the torture porn time, and I'm watching movie after movie, just people stuck to chairs, getting, ripped to pieces and everything. And I'm bored shitless. And this short film comes on called Wretched. And it's written and directed by a woman named Heidi Honeycutt. And the basic idea is bulimia as the monster. And it stars Joe Bob Briggs is the husband, and they're just at a diner, and he's just watching her eat, and he's being rude. And he's just saying, why do you have to do this? My mother, why did you have to be so mean to my mother? And there's close-ups of the food and her eating. And she's not responding to him, but she is violently eating the food. and she's eating more and more of the food. And then she excuses herself to go to the bathroom. And when she's going, there's this narration that goes, it says, always eat a green thing after the brown thing and then have some water. You need to know where to stop. And I'm like, oh my God, she's going to go in there and vomit. And she does. And the story continues. She goes back and has this whole thing. It's like this ring of hell that she's going through. And then there's a psychic snap that happens when she finally goes into the bathroom and she can't stop throwing up. And it's all somewhat a hallucination. And she comes back and says, I think I'm sick. And all of a sudden, the guy who's been mean to her the whole time is like, oh, no, honey, I think you're fine. You know, I think you're just a little bit tense. So it's like the ring of hell continues. That is a story I would have never thought of in a million years.
Yeah.
And it was this great monster that was personal. And it was something that was right in front of my face. And I was like, wow, there are so many stories here that aren't being told. And so as women started getting into horror, I mean, women have always been in horror, but there usually was just one. There was always the one woman who was allowed to go do all these things. And so in the 80s, you had people like Catherine Bigelow, who started with Near Dark. And that was really where she made her thing. But she was kind of going at it like, I can slug it just as hard as the guys. That was how you made it in the 80s. But now there's an allowance for women to have different stories. There was a series of shorts called XX. It was an anthology horror film, and it's not great, but there is a really remarkable moment, which is Ivana Yukovic, I think is her name. She used to write for Rue Morgue, but anyway, she did Jack Ketchum's The Box, which is a pretty famous short story. So all she did was change the gender. Instead of it being about the father, it's about the mother. And the father is now playing the role of the mother in the book. And you're watching this movie, and when you're reading the book, The Box, and all the narration is from the book, everything is the same, except that they just change the roles. And I found myself going, what an ice queen. Why is she not taking care of the family? When it was the father, on the other hand, I'm sitting there going, oh, this poor guy, he's losing his family. The idea of not having power, it must be killing him. So literally, I'm watching this movie, and it's like a litmus test of how much I've been told what our roles are supposed to be.
That's a wonderful
and so
point.
As it was so on point and amazing. And so that's what I see with horror films that are out there. We're getting a lot. Titan and Raw are amazing. If you're not seen Julia Durkanow's films, Raw is really interesting. That's one that I tell people, ease into Titan, because that's a really off the wall one. But Raw is something that most horror film lovers are going to be able to jump into. But it has a jumping off point where it's no longer the concerns of masculine. It suddenly goes into how important it is that family, the familial, the mother and daughter and sibling, they hate each other without knowing that they hate each other. They're killing each other to build each other up. It's a really interesting thing how your mom can be your biggest enemy, how your sister can be your biggest enemy. And yet you're all fighting against this world that's coming at you. These are stories that don't normally get told. A lot of stories about how body is currency. You know, American Mary is one that I really champion in the book because that is a story that's been told a few times, but it's a woman who is going to medical school, and she's essentially raped by the people in charge, and they photograph her, so she leaves. But what she does, she continues to do surgery, but she goes to a vet, and then she gets into body modification. And what's interesting is she takes body modification, the Soska sisters, they turn this into how that is release. To chop off a finger cosmetically is to say, this is my body. You can't do a fucking thing. It's mine. And the idea that the surgeons are making their coin on body autonomy, stealing from your body, changing your body with plastic surgery. She goes on to do this radical plastic surgery movie that normally the people who have all the body mods would be the monster, the scary thing. They're the people who are free. And so I thought it was really interesting that this movie talked about the true pound of flesh, and how we look at people sometimes as just the flesh thing that's in front of us. and they don't care about the mind or the soul. And so I think these are things that we didn't normally talk about. One of the greatest is the Babadook. Watch the Babadook if you haven't seen it. A lot of people go, man, that's a hard movie. That kid, I get it already. The kid's a problem. I said, yeah, but that's why that movie goes on about that. She can never leave. She's stuck with that. That is what she's stuck with. And nobody in the right mind up until that movie would make a movie about a mother who resents their child and she's the hero. And it's all about death and grief and guilt. And the Babadook is the thought you're not supposed to think, right? It's the unsaid resentment. And in most monster movies, two things are going to happen. You kill the monster, or the monster kills you, or there's a curse, or there's something that you can do to rectify the whole thing and bring us back to the apple cart up. The Babadook comes up with a new answer. You live with it. How do you learn to live with it? And that is such a thing that I've never seen in a horror movie before, and I can't help but feel that's feminine.
Speaking of women creators, Catriona Ward, I've had her on the show a couple of times, and she's a horror author. And one of the things she said, something that really stuck with me. She said, with horror, you either kill it, or it kills you, or you make friends with it, which is something very similar to what you just said.
Yeah. I had not seen that in a film done effectively, and you can't miss it in the Babadook. And I thought that was such a freeing thing. It gave so many new venues or avenues for us to end stories, but nobody ends it. I mean, I think it's one of those things. It's the hardest ending. It's like first, second, or third person, which is the hardest to write in. And so, see how many people write in the different tenses, and that'll tell you immediately which is the hardest thing to write in. And so I think that you find that story, okay, it's a draw. There are no good guys, there are no bad guys. It's you and me, and we just disagree. Is the hard one to do. I think in his own way, Lovecraft did that. I mean, The Color Out of Space, it's not really a monster, and does it really kill everybody, or does it mutate them into something that's new? So it's I think that's hard to do, but I think it's an interesting thing. I like what Cronenberg has done with his career. Cronenberg is always saying that death is not the end, and we shouldn't fear death. It's a revolution. Dying, the changes in your body, is the body in revolution. You are evolving into something different and new, and it may be terribly frightening, and we don't want to evolve in that fashion, but it's going to happen. And that he sees his stories as love stories and happy endings.
Shadow over Innsmouth.
Yes.
The protagonist is afraid of it the entire time, and then at the end he accepts it.
Yeah.
And Stuart Gordon adapted that very well.
Yeah.
With the movie Dagon.
I can't say that it's my absolute favorite of those adaptations, but it's because I haven't seen them all. Right. But that is magnificent. Dagon is just incredible. And I mean, Stuart Gordon was fantastic. When I met him, we sat and talked, and he goes, "Why are you not making a Lovecraft film? You do know that it's all public domain. Why isn't every independent filmmaker making a Lovecraft movie? You can just go with it. You can do anything that you want with these fucking things." And he was just so supportive in that. And he was so good at working on that kind of weird humor and violence and oddity. He, from the very beginning, he was doing the organic theater back in the day. So he was always trying to find a way to flip the audience into being uncomfortable. And I think that punk rock sensibility of Reanimator is amazing, because it was a movie that allowed you to laugh at some really, really terrible stuff, and have some really, really terrible stuff that made you guilty when you were watching it. So I think
Pete, you were there a few years ago at Necronomicon, I believe it was. Stuart Gordon was there, and he screened. We got to watch Dagon on the big screen,
right?
And Stuart Gordon, gave us some remarks before and after the movie. It was wonderful.
Yeah, it was pretty fun.
Yeah, I liked him a lot. He was definitely, he directed every conversation, but he did it in a very gentle and friendly way, and he was very open to artists, and he was always telling people that you're wasting time not making something. You know, seriously, you can fall backwards and land in a good story. You know, he'd say shit like that.
Well, the name of your book is Screaming for Pleasure and covers topics that we talked about today and other topics too, that are related. So check that out. I'll have a link to that in the show notes, everybody, as well as, yeah, I do this almost every week, as well as a link to other books that we mentioned or that I just want to tell people about. So yeah, Scott, thanks for being here.
Thank you so very much for having me. And I hope that everybody goes out and watches some good horror and
Yeah.
reads some good horror in next couple of days in honor of this insanely good conversation.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to stick around and talk about a few more topics. You're welcome to stay, or we're welcome to go about and eat dinner or lunch or whatever you want to do. So
yeah, well, that will happen. But at the same point, if we're done, yeah, I'm still willing to talk a little bit, especially about Cabin, because now that I know that you were part of a cult, that is one of the main reasons that Cabin has so much power for me, because it's all about what if we're wrong. The whole book is what if we're wrong. And somebody has to be wrong, right? And yet he doesn't necessarily tell you. Maybe, kind of, sort of, but you can't. There's no definitive thing that happens at the end. So I think that book is it was so brilliant. I've read it 3 times, and I tell people to read it, and I tell people you're probably going to get mad at me. I love how many people get upset by that book because it does a couple things that are unexpected and some people might call cheating, but I think it's great because it does really hit on even the reader's belief system, and it sets up so many intriguing characters.
Well, he's very good. Paul's very good at breaking the rules in his writing and doing it very well.
Yeah,
you know. So,
has anybody else seen the Polish horror film Hellhole?
no, not yet. I've heard
It just
about it.
came out.
Okay, I haven't
What's it
seen
about?
It is about a exorcist who is sent to a remote abbey because weird things are going on. And so if you want to see this film, I'm going to spoil it for you.
Yeah, I just looked it up. So
you're going to spoil the film?
I'm going to spoil the film. They're going to break Rolex rules. Okay.
Oh, jeez.
Essentially, the priests are cultists. They believe that God and the devil sit side by side, and that it is now the devil's turn to rule the earth. And all they have to do is follow this complex set of rules. And by the way, the exorcist is their chosen one. And they just have to feed him the flesh of 7 sinners and drink the blood of the virgin.
Yeah, it's a recipe.
If they
That's a nice Wicker Man twist.
Yes.
Yeah.
By the way, greetings, Bridget.
Oh, hey.
Yeah, hi.
Hi,
Hi, it's nice to meet you.
Snuck in here.
They do this whole thing, and they do the final sacrifice, and nothing happens.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh shit, what if we were wrong?
Yeah.
Or like what's his name in Frank Langella in The Ninth Gate?
Yeah, like, that's exactly what I. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly what I was going to bring up. I was like,
so the leader's like, you know what? Everybody just go back to your cells. We'll start tomorrow anew. Like none of this ever happened.
Let's try this again. I think I had the wrong recipe.
You killed 8 people. You force fed some guy their flesh. You know, and yes, they've gotten something wrong.
Yeah, but that is so great. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up Ninth Gate too, because that's one of the guys that is probably one of the greatest directors of horror is Polanski. You know, and Ninth Gate is not a great thing, but it is under his mindset, the cynicism that Polanski's always had all the way from the beginning. It's hard to separate what happened in his life and what his movies tend to say. So him surviving a concentration camp, him pretending to be Catholic when he was Jewish and having the family get attacked, having him get shot at by the SS as he's trying to get away, and how it twisted him and all the terrible things that happen in his life. Not only does his wife and child get murdered, but it's the murder of the century. He can't get away from it. At one point, he's actually one of the people who's being accosted for it. And then the rape. All of this terrible, horrible stuff. I think there's this layer of self-hatred that has always gone through his movies, and a hatred of institutions, and a hatred of group thought. And you see it in his best films and in his horror films specifically. If you look at The Tenant and Rosemary's Baby, you're getting to see how, I just was talking about Rosemary's Baby yesterday about body autonomy, right? That this is a movie that is perfect for today, because you're watching these elderly women basically doting over this woman, telling her how she has to run her body and use her body. And you realize they don't give a fuck about her. They care about the thing that's not built yet. That is the thing that has more rights than her, has more body autonomy. And it's so insane to watch that movie and feel that, and see how it's also in The Pianist. It's also in The Ninth Gate. It's always about these institutions that end up inevitably hurting so many people and are wrong. Everything that you believe is a lie about these things, and the liars get away with it. It's really intriguing to look at that. And I think in the center of all of that is that he has self-hatred, whatever different things there are about him. That's fascinating, even if he's repulsive.
And it makes me think of, have you guys seen The Devil's Hour? It's
yeah,
new limited series on Netflix or Prime, something like that.
It's one of those. BBC, isn't it?
No, I don't think it's BBC. Well, it might be that too, I suppose. But right at the beginning, Peter Capaldi's saying, "This is the way the world is," and they're like, "No, you're a lunatic murderer." It fits in real well with what you're saying. And I also wanted to bring it up anyway because I just finished it. Have you guys seen this yet?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, you guys should watch
I've
it.
seen it. It's wonderful.
Yeah, you liked it, Rick? Any other thoughts without spoiling it?
Right? Did you get to the ending?
I did.
I haven't yet. So
yeah, we don't. We try not to spoil things.
Think for about a few minutes what just happened.
Yeah.
I want to say I was what just happened. I was looking up things, trying to find anything explained on YouTube. It was one video and nobody didn't do it adequately.
Yeah. That makes me feel better about life, Rick, that you look up something, what just happened. I need an explanation on YouTube. I love this.
Yeah, Scott Rick knows everything. So you like
I feel so much better about doing the same.
You like the ending as well, Rick?
I thought the ending was very interesting. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's cool. We don't typically spoil anything, so you don't have to worry about that.
It's a certain dilemma. We could do a spoiler discussion of it someday, but
yeah.
I had mixed feelings about what just happened.
Yeah, I'm
at the end. You mean
somewhat irritated by it, but I'm irritated because I'm feeling the stretch. This whole the first 2 episodes felt like they were really stretching this to make it 10 episodes. It did not feel that what they were talking about necessitated the pace that they were going at. And I may be wrong. I'm going to try and continue to watch it, but I was like going, God damn. Now, on the other hand, have you seen? It was Korean, I believe. Hellbound. I think it was called Hellbound, where
I started watching that.
Oh my God. If you can, watch it to the end. The one where the entities come after people on their phone. And,
right. Yeah, I tried to watch that. It was a damn good beginning, but I couldn't get into it after a while.
I really, that and Midnight Mass, I think are directly talking about what you're talking about with the Polish film, and perhaps what happens on this one. Anyway, the reason that I brought that up is that those 2 things that I just mentioned, Hellbound and Midnight Mass, are talking about groups that realize that they have believed the wrong thing. And it was like all the information is right here, but it's that idea that we need to make connections. And there's the book Afterland by Lauren Bucas, which is the one pandemic book that I finished because it didn't really feel pandemic, but it was all about testicular cancer, like prostate and testicular cancer runs rampant and just kills most of the men. And there are some young boys that are left, but we are thrust into a matriarchy. And boys, because they're now a commodity to keep everybody going, are basically prisoners. It's supposed to be to protect them, but they are prisoners. They're not able to do anything and not able to leave. And our main character breaks her son out and goes on this long road trip in a world that is still trying to figure out what's going on. And half of the world tries to move forward, and another half are women who are positive that they did something wrong, and that's why God took men. And they're deforming themselves and disfiguring themselves and doing all this crazy stuff. They're a religion that believes if we show enough repentance, the men will return. And it's amazing how disturbing that story is and how good it is and how it does these strange things like women at an airport. One of the boys are usually dressed as girls now so that they can pass when they're young. And then the voice breaks and in the airport, and these women suddenly all come towards as if there's some weird imperative that they need to protect this kid, and they tear him apart, they kill him. And it's like wow. Yeah, it's a fantastic, really disturbing, challenging book, and it's got a strong message. And Lauren Bucas is pretty amazing. I think her work is really, really good. And it's off kilter. It is about pandemic, but it's not about pandemic. Kind of like what I was saying in the show. I'm not interested in the microbes and zombies as microbes. I'm interested in how do we live once we realize that there's these microbes. And so the idea that everybody went nuts for a while, and they're still nuts, people started to believe all sorts of crazy stuff, and drug use is up, and we don't feel like we're in time anymore. We're all Billy Pilgrim just kind of floating around. All of that stuff, those are the things that I think are interesting. And so that's why I liked Afterland as a book. It was really about, what do we do? Okay, great. Now the world has ended and we're stuck with this. What's the personal story that's still happening? You know, what is happening is
my son told me, he's 20, and he told me a few months back that, but I feel 17 or 18. It's because that big 2-year pause that we all went through,
How much of that is arrested development? How much have we been, how much, we talk about it all the time. My work is my life, but that's not great. And that might be how the entire culture has been running since the 50s, right? Once we got our feet back after the Depression, everybody just worked. And once we didn't have work for those 2 years, did we develop? How much of us, we talk about cyborgs, how much of us is this character, this...
I think the people that were already like, my work is not my life, or my work that I can keep doing from home, I love it, is my life, or both, they were not great. Nobody was great, but more or less okay. But the people who, what you're talking about, their work was their life, they're like, who am I now? What do I do?
What do I execute?
Yeah, Pete.
So coming from that, from the white collar, blue collar kind of thing, people were told, we're like a family for decades,
right?
And then
that pink slips you.
Yeah, well, and that happened, right? But here, there was nothing wrong with the business. It's just that there's no work.
Yeah,
it's gone, and so people who were heavily invested in that as their identity suddenly were being told that no, oh, by the way, we lied to you.
Yeah.
You're not needed.
Yeah.
You're not part of our core business. And that was devastating to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And now as we recover, there's this growing thought process that, well, you need to come back to work.
Right. Oh.
And it's perfectly fine here. Why do I need to come back to the
Yeah,
office?
a lot of people are saying I've been doing
Yeah.
just fine for 2 years at home.
Are you unhappy?
So many corporate lies fell to the
Mhm.
wayside. Remote
So-
work never works, you know.
Right, but were you unhappy? And these are the questions. Were you unhappy with my performance? Because I think we did more work, and the notes say that we made more.
Pete keeps losing connection today, he said.
Yeah.
That was a good freeze.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great freeze on his face. Hey, I yeah,
More money. I am okay.
yeah,
So,
you're
I just think
you were
connection.
frozen. Yeah,
That was great. Mid-word. We came back.
It's this kind of crazy idea that we have to go back to the office when everything worked fine after 3 years. We figured it out. But then they're like, oh, well, we have all this office space that we need to put people in.
Yeah. I think
But
one of
do
the
you
things,
though?
But
do you have to?
right.
do you really?
Yeah. I think one of the things that happened, and you see it with the idea of what's it called? Soft quitting and stuff like that,
Yeah,
which I'm all for.
Quiet
Because
quitting.
this,
Yes.
because
hell with them.
we're finding out how little they were actually paying you. What happened in those 2 years is we were outside of the hamster wheel and we saw that there was a wheel. We didn't know. Everybody had to work just to keep surviving. They had this whole system set up. We're just making enough to get through, not enough for you to make choices for yourself. It was always about the company. And suddenly, because of this insane thing that happened, the first time since Woody Guthrie time in the Wobblies, where the worker actually had an upper hand that could not be moved. And it was really astonishing. I can't wait to see where it goes, because all these old lies that we were told fell apart, because of necessity.
Yeah, there's all these there's a huge Reddit thing about people and how they quit and why they quit. And they realize, you know what? I just realized you weren't paying me that much.
Yeah.
You treated me like shit, and you know what? I don't need you, you need me.
Yeah.
So
People who say people don't want to work are just saying half of the sentence. They don't want to work for the wages that I and other people have agreed is just enough to keep you going, and
right.
I get the profits.
That's a great point. Half the sentence. I like that.
Yeah. They just say half the sentence every time they're doing that. It's like Peter, it just kind of drops off.
Right. Well, today anyway. Hey,
that's what ended up happening.
So this is something nice. I have been waiting for this. On November the 8th, which is this Tuesday, a new edition of, I know how many editions do we need, but this looks great. A new edition of the Silmarillion, if I'm saying that right. I'm never sure if I am. It comes out, and it is illustrated throughout in color by Tolkien himself, and with the complete text printed in 2 colors.
Very nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I may have to ask for this for Christmas.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, very.
If you're a book person, that kind of thing is certainly something that you might want to get. I still have my early edition of The Hobbit that sits on my shelf, and it's like afraid to touch it sometimes, but it's like it's just so fucking cool. But yeah, it's funny, we were just talking about pandemic. So one of the things, I'm doing a show that I'm putting together, and I've been putting it together forever. And it's one of those things that's happened with the pandemic. My narratives are sliding, and I'm just doing more interviews. And I want to get back to my essays, which is what I really had a lot of fun doing. And I have this one called Seasons in the Abyss that I'm doing. And I'm talking about how we had this cognitive dissonance that happened and how it affected me. And then movies that I believe really talk to that. And one of the things that I mentioned was me going to the dentist during the pandemic. So for a while, couldn't go. But the first time I go back, I can't go in. I have to call, and I'm sitting out in the parking lot. And then when I get called, I go in, and they sterilize me, and I have a mask on, and I sit there. Then I get in the chair, and they're blowing air into my mouth so that I'm not breathing on anyone. They have this entire system set up. And then they go, oh, you need an x-ray. You haven't had a dental x-ray in a while. So suddenly I am getting a lead vest put on me. The person is hiding behind that, and they are taking this big tube and putting it next to my face, and they are shooting invisible monsters at my face while I am surrounded by invisible monsters we fear. And the cognitive dissonance of that was so insane. It was like, this monster's okay for today. This monster's never going to be okay. And it was just so freaking weird. And, you know, of course, everybody's just doing the best that they can. But it was this moment of terrifying absurdity that I'm opening my mouth in this place. Anything can fall in. And they're also shooting these monsters at me, these invisible creatures, just like the invisible creatures that are around me that could take my life. And I think that is we had so many instances that were kind of like that it was very hard to reconcile with. I made it through 2020, no problems, because I used to be a firefighter and stuff, so I was in defense mode. But once 2021 hit, I kind of lost the bubble, and I started walking at night. And I walked 1,000 miles in 8 months.
Oh, wow.
I just worked 7 miles a night to 11 miles a night, just through like San Francisco, empty. Everything's empty. And I was just walking ghost towns. And that helped me. Somehow walking helped me clear my mind, but I didn't see people. And if you saw people, it was a little bit disturbing. And it's kind of like, if you live in a city, there's always Christmas Day, right, where there's nobody. And San Francisco is desolate at that point, but nobody's home. They've all gone elsewhere. They've gone on vacation, whatever. The city closes down. But during the pandemic, you knew everybody was right behind those doors. Like everybody's just sitting there, hiding, hibernating. And it was really unsettling. You know, the city's alive and dead at the same time.
I bet that was unsettling. We mentioned Benson and Moorhead earlier. You did, Scott. You mentioned Synchronic. They also did The Endless, of course. They did VHS Viral. I didn't know that. I haven't seen it.
Oh, they did one of the episodes. Not very good.
Oh, Resolution. Anyway, they got a new movie coming out to theaters.
Something in the Dirt, right?
Yeah, Something in the Dirt. Quote, two neighbors witness what seems to be a supernatural event in one of their apartments. At first terrified, they realize that documenting this phenomenon could provide them the lives they've always dreamed of. The duo explains, generally the movie is about these two neighbors. One of them just moved into an apartment. Something might be paranormal or otherworldly happens, and they decide to explore it together. It's a reaction to what if you made the X-Files today? How would you do it? So I'm looking forward to checking that one out.
Oh yeah. I love their work.
Yeah. What do you guys watched and read lately? Bridget, Rick?
I just was getting caught up with Cabinet of Curiosities finally. So I finished the last episode this morning.
The autopsy was awesome.
How do you like it?
It was really good. I was really moved by the last episode. I thought it was a really nice ghost story.
I thought
Sorry.
Very.
What's that, Rick?
That was the best one.
Which one is that one?
The Murmuring.
Yeah. So that's Jennifer Kent, who did the Babadook.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Same director.
Yep, same director. I don't know. I think she wrote that as well. I'm not sure. It's very M.R. Jamesian, and
it's like Del Toro story.
Oh, it's based on a Del Toro story. Okay, I knew it was something like that. So great. Yeah, I thought that was really, really cool. I thought it was a great end to that series, and I figured where it was going to go, but I thought it was really lovely in that way. You can't help but think DeMaurier when you have all these birds going around, and a couple other influences. But I really. Once again, this is something that felt very different, a different perspective on a story. Have you seen Karen Kusama's The Invitation?
Oh, I love that movie.
Yeah, fantastic movie. Another one that is very Polanski in its way of doing things. There's a lot of people hidden by walls. Doors are in front of people. You get half conversations. All of that kind of stuff that he did to create paranoia is in that movie. But it's got such a great storyline to it. Once again, belief. You know how dangerous is grief and belief.
Speaking of drinking the Kool-Aid, unfortunately.
Matt,
That
I know you
movie.
need to go. You want to show the prize again?
Yeah, sure. Remember, there is this
Oh, yeah.
artist named Steve Meschuk. We have 2 high quality poster prints from him as our prize today. Check
For
out
those
his
who can't see, it's a Shadow Out of Time prints. The
and
Elder.
these prints, you can look at them in a photograph on the Lovecraft Ezine community page on Facebook. But if you want to win these prizes, just send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com. We randomly select a winner in about 6 or 7 weeks. You got plenty of time to get your entry in.
Yeah, so for those of you who you're like, I'm much of this 3 weeks from now, I don't have time to get in on it. You still do typically. So
Oh, and
thanks for that, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And
Go
those look
cook dinner.
fantastic.
I know that's why you have to go. You have to go cook dinner for yourself, right?
Yeah.
All right. See you, Matt. Thanks.
It was a
Bye, Matt.
pleasure. And Bridget, I'm sorry we didn't get introduced. We were in the middle of the show. I saw you there, and I'm like, I can't it's going to be too fucking weird.
You should go ahead and introduce yourself. She told me earlier she had to be late today, so
Yeah, so sorry, I was sneaking in, but I said in the side chat for those that are listening that because it happened to be when Scott was talking about the end of the world, and I said, well, I'm glad I showed up in time for the end of the world.
yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, hi, I'm Bridget. Write music and do some art stuff, and big horror fan, and like to try and mesh all those things together somehow into some weird
Yeah, she
artistic baby.
she what was the name of that box that you sent me? I can see it way back there, but
Oh, the tentacle box?
yeah.
Or yeah.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah,
So-
I made some creepy music boxes, do some weird 3D art. I like writing about horror music. I host a
Ooh, soundtracks.
yeah, I host a Facebook group called Haunting Melody Horror Music Group, and we talk about horror music, mostly soundtracks, but other stuff too. So
Have you ever talked to Blake Fishara?
no.
He wrote 2 books called Scored to Death.
Oh yes, I love it, and I have it. I have the one right here, and I know
Yeah.
that he's got a Kickstarter right now for a documentary. That sounds
Yeah.
amazing. I
Yeah.
would love to
Oh,
talk
no
to him in
kidding.
person.
Yeah, you folks would have a great conversation.
Yeah,
I
for
was on
sure.
I was on his podcast, and he was on mine a couple times, and just the idea of how important music is to that. So one of the things I didn't do that I try to do whenever I'm on a podcast, but there were so many of us, I have a thing in my book called The First Kiss with Horror. So it's like, what is the movie or the book that hooked you, that you said this was yours? And like a first kiss, sometimes they're not great, right? Sometimes it disturbs you and you have to come back later. But is there a first kiss? What's the one that when you saw that, you kind of had your fate sealed that you were going to continue down the path?
Oh gosh,
Pete, anything for you at all?
that's such a great question.
I've actually asked this question a lot to guess.
Yeah.
My horror drug was Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein.
Nice, because there's actually good scares in that. When I was a kid, it scared me.
Mm-hmm.
So my father used to read me from the modern library edition of Tales of the Terror and the Supernatural, Rats in the Wall,
Oh yeah.
as a bedtime story.
Like, really, honestly, the first thing that I remember is being probably a toddler and my mom teaching me that rhyme of the worms crawl in, the worms crawl up in your stomach and out your mouth. And I was pretty much sold from that point, I guess.
That's great.
I can't.
You don't
even
know
s-
that?
I don't know that one
Oh
either.
wait, you say?
Oh, I know that. Yeah.
You say
Yes. What?
Because we learned it snout.
Snout. Yeah, that's the one that I heard.
Yes,
Oh,
no.
in your stomach and out your snout.
Yeah.
I've heard it both ways, but we always saying it out your mouth.
But that's just an example, because this is a
Yeah.
this song is passed along verbally.
Yes, oral
So
tradition.
it's going to
for sure.
change.
Yeah.
There are
Mhm.
going to be regional and family versions.
Yeah. So with that, Bridget, murder ballads. So if you like horror soundtracks, I did a chapter on murder ballads because that's something that's regional and it's something
Awesome.
that people believe is real. And some of them are based on real things, but they extrapolate. One of my favorites is Stagger Lee. There's like 400 versions of Stagger Lee. Everyone knows the 50s one, Go Stagger Lee. And that's the famous one, but it was based on an actual murder that happened in East St. Louis, I think. And it's interesting, when it was first done, Stagger Lee, the wife of the guy that he killed comes back and castrates him. But as time goes by, Stagger Lee becomes more of a cult hero. We want him to get away from the police. We somehow admire this terrible rogue. And so it's interesting how things change. And like the Trois sisters and the butcher's wife, all of these things, people will go, oh no, it happened here in the Appalachians, but there's also a version in Scotland, and it probably came from Scotland, became part of this thing. So I love how there is that thing with especially music. There is a transference of stories that change with every generation and change with every location.
Something about the melody helps you remember and interact with the words in a different way. I mean, poetry you can remember, of course, and connect to it, but there is something about music and singing it to each other and keeping that going.
Yeah, who was it that just said something about that? Oh, I went to see this band called Wardruna, and Wardruna.
Oh my gosh, I love Wardruna.
Yeah, so there we go. So I just went to see them live, and at the end of the concert, he was saying, he basically said, if you came here to try and pull some Viking shit, go fuck yourself. That culture is not to be taken, you know. And
my gosh,
we're not racist, and fuck you if you are. And one of the things that he said at the end, though, is we're going to do one more song. It's really the heart of what we do on Wardruna. He goes, we don't sing to each other anymore. We used to sing for everything. We sang at supper. We sang at bed. We sang when someone died. We passed them through to the next veil. We sang when people were born. We don't sing to each other. And if there's anything that we can do that we want to try and do is bring that oral tradition back where people sing. And here's a song about dying. And then he did this long song that they do that's pretty famous that has all about death. But of course, it's in Norwegian, so I don't know what the words are. So it's really, it's intriguing that you bring that up about singing, that so intimate. And I think that's another reason why people have such a passionate thing, love-hate for horror, is that it's very intimate. You know, talking about what gets you scared, allowing the shields to come down and allow yourself to be human and have a human interaction with people. Why I still love going to the theater. It's like a tent revival sometimes. You're in there and we can all be scared at the same time. We all kind of support each other in this weird way. And this non-permeable membrane that's in front of us that we know things can't come through, and yet we get scared anyway. And you know, so singing, all of these things are intimate. You know, it's like breaking bread, singing with somebody.
Would you want to interview that guy if he was willing? I forget his name.
Me? Heck yeah.
Blake Fashara?
I would love to talk with him.
Yeah.
Maybe Scott can.
Yeah, I'll send him an email. I have to send him an
awesome.
email anyway, because he got in touch with me if I could help with the Kickstarter, and we hadn't talked.
Oh, we can help too.
A long time. Yeah,
I've got about
exactly.
220,000 followers on Facebook, so.
You should. He should be very happy with that. And I was, what was it? I was going to say about that? It doesn't matter. It was a pointless thing to say if I can't remember it.
Well, you know, I've got a little bit of music training, but nothing like Bridget. I love that too. The soundtracks. I love how the right soundtrack, it will put you in the mood or the feeling that you need to be in, but it's not so intrusive that it gets in the way of what's going on. You know, there's just so many different things. It would take me an hour to go on, but you know, like The Ninth Gate, we talked about it earlier. There's a perfect example. I love that music.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean,
that's
we can help
interesting.
With Kickstarter, and Bridget could interview him if he's willing.
Yeah.
So.
Blake and I hooked up because of our podcasts, but he fell in love when I was talking about I forget which soundtrack it was, but I said, it's a sense memory. When I hear that, I feel my 10-year-old feet rubbing in the carpet. Because when I would hear this song, it would make me a little bit nervous. And he's like, "Oh my God, that's so great. That's the sense memory that we get from music." And when I write, I have a Spotify that it's been added to a whole bunch of times. It's nothing but horror soundtracks throughout all the decades. And
yeah, I can't write with that with songs with lyrics. I can't have those on. But
right.
You're right. When I'm working on horror stuff, a horror movie soundtrack, just the music, it puts me in the mood perfectly.
And all the Italian cannibal stuff is some of the most beautiful orchestration that you'll ever hear. It's so funny. The love theme from Cannibal Holocaust is beautiful. And whenever I hear it, I go, it's hard to believe that that is part of that movie.
Yeah.
And there's even like a joke meme about, I've just made this great piece of music. I'm giving it to my friend who's a director. Oh, this will be perfect for the intestine eating. No, it's got nothing to do with that. What are you talking about?
Well, let's see. Do we do the same kind? Do we capture the same kind of feeling as the intestine eating, or do we go with a contrasting feeling?
Yeah, right.
These are the conversations.
Yeah, I may see about getting an email out to Mike that has a link for you, Bridget, that he can pass on, which is a BBC interview about Hammer Films and the musicians.
Oh, lovely.
And so they had this whole thing about how they were experimental avant-garde conductors.
Yeah.
And awesome. It was how avant-garde actually got some firmness, or it was going to actually hold itself up in Britain. When I can't think of a word, things just kind of go all over the place. But basically talked to these guys and said, unbeknownst to people, they were getting this high class musical absorption from Dracula, and so these movies had this thoroughly incongruous. Normally these two things would not mix, and they mixed perfectly for the Hammer films. And so it's a really cool thing about how the arts intersect, and just how powerful music can be, and how something that is considered high art can work with something that's considered lowbrow.
Well, it looks like Scored to Death, his Kickstarter made it, so that's great.
Yeah, it's 47,000 out of 40,000. So yay!
Yes, Scored to Death: The Dark Art of Scary Movie Music. I'm looking forward to watching this documentary.
Yeah, his books are really great, and he's a really fun guy to talk to, and he's worked hard to get where he is on this, and he just knows a lot of the really good people who do conducting and are I can't think of the word. Why am I saying conductor?
Composer.
Thank you, composer. Holy shit!
I just think that
that's all right.
It's anyone interested in horror, but I don't know. Some of us musically inclined, especially, were extremely interested in this. So I love
how brilliant of an idea it was. He got to talk to John Carpenter because he did not come to John Carpenter about the movies. He came to John Carpenter about the music, and Carpenter just does not want to talk about the movies anymore. He's just done with that. And so nobody's getting interviews with him, and he ended up getting one because he came to him musically.
That's cool.
Yeah, I heard
and his interview with him is so good.
Yeah,
I'll have to watch that. Is that on YouTube, Bridget?
No, it's in the book.
Oh, in the book.
Yeah,
okay.
it's in the
first
book.
one.
Oh, in the book, right? I haven't read the book yet.
Right. Pardon me 1 second. I'll be right back, and we'll see if I'm gonna say goodbye or not. But I'll be right back.
Okay. Well, that advice, I heard some good advice a couple of years ago, that if you're gonna interview someone like a celebrity, you give the what you should talk about. He gave the example of interviewing William Shatner, and of course William Shatner is sick to death of talking about Star Trek. I mean, he loves it. He's written books and everything, but you're not going to ask him something that no one's asked before. So he talked to him about T.J. Hooker, and he's like, Shatner could not have been more excited to talk about T.J. Hooker. And I asked him, how do you do this? How did you do the car when you skittered it all around and you jump out the door and everything with your gun? and everything. And he's like, I couldn't get him to shut up. He was just going on and on.
That's
So-
great. Yes.
So yeah.
It's like
Well, you doing good, Rick?
Yeah.
All
I was
right.
at the end of The Watcher,
mm,
To watch. Oh, yeah.
talking about, we were talking about
The series, not the
whether
movie.
not knowing something will drive you crazy. That's what the whole series is about.
Yes. You know, you can't say anything about that really without giving it away, but yeah, at first I thought I don't like this ending, and the more I think about it, the more I think, yeah, that's a really appropriate ending to that series. So, and by the way, did you know that's based on a real
Yeah.
thing that happened?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they even use the same town, same address, everything. It's wild. So
I wonder if some of the neighbors are like that.
probably not. Well, next week,
Did you realize the librarian, not the librarian, the English teacher, the old English teacher who created the poem about the house, is played by the guy from what's that movie with Jennifer Beals?
Flashdance?
Yeah, Flashdance. The love interest of Flashdance was the English teacher.
Oh no, I didn't.
mm.
Of course, I haven't seen Flashdance in 40 years. So
Yeah, it's funny. I actually tortured my son with that movie about a year ago.
oh
I
my
can't remember.
God.
I can't remember what brought it up, but I was like, "You need. Okay, you're 18
Years
now.
from
You need to
now,
see Flashdance."
years from now, he's gonna be in therapy talking about how his mom made him see Flashdance.
Probably, but you know what? That movie like was it affected me
kidding.
when it came out. You know,
Right.
I'm
it
gonna
was like,
live
man,
forever.
she's a steel worker in
Yeah.
like, you know, in like a man's world, and then dancing and but wanted to do ballet in her own way. I was like, man,
Fame.
you
Yeah.
go.
They're still they give tours in Pittsburgh of the Flashdance tour.
God,
Oh,
still?
really?
Different areas. Yeah,
Wow.
it's got a revival. Like
That's
everything
great.
else, it's got a revival to it. And it's one of the things that I think can still be shown from the 80s that doesn't have a lot of problematic moments in it. But so I think
Yeah.
people have kind of, I heard you guys talking about Watcher. So The Watcher,
Mm.
I love the movie Watcher, which I thought was really, really good for a very small, compact, nasty idea. But though I haven't watched The Watcher yet, but I'm wondering if this is based on
It is. It's based on a real case.
yeah, is it based on the New Jersey thing
Yeah.
where the guy had
They
the
even like
video
when you were
camera?
gone, I talked about they
Yeah, I heard
even,
it in my
they even use the same address in
wow.
the same
So
town, everything.
so
So-
that I wonder if it's the same director because there was a movie called S asterisk M. It was like S and M, but it wasn't saying S and M. But it was about a guy who it was pseudo documentary and pseudo like found footage kind of thing, where he was following this guy who said that he was a killer, and he got involved in it because he made a movie called Soft for Burial or something like that, Soft for Digging, which was a horror movie that he had made, and then he decided to make this documentary about horror and kink and horror and pain. What is the connection? And he follows this guy, and one of the
Ryan
reasons that
Murphy?
he said maybe it's Ryan Murphy. I
Yeah.
have to S and M Man. That was it. S and Man, Sandman. In other words, that's what the name was. But it has S and M big and then A N small. But the thing was, he grew up in that town, and so he told the story about that video camera, and I think they talk about it in Cropsey, which is another documentary, and it's about urban legends that every town in New Jersey had a Cropsey. That was the homeless guy that killed people in the woods, and so I'm interested in seeing that because that was really disturbing. And they talked about what may or may not have happened. What was real? Was that guy real and stuff? And they showed him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Watcher,
So
there's definitely some really creepy moments in that series.
I'm really interested in seeing it now because so many people were angry. So many people were disappointed and hated the end and said, I just wasted all this time.
Well, I don't know if you heard me, but at first I was disappointed in the end, and I said the more that I think about it, the more that I feel that the end was pretty appropriate. Well done, I thought.
Yeah,
Appropriate, at least.
I agree with you.
Do you? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested to see it, because there were a couple of films that
I mean,
I
that's really all I
had.
can say without ruining it, but
Yeah, I had no interest in them until somebody had a really hot opinion.
And you're like, what's the
I'm-
controversy? I need to know.
Yeah. What is the thing?
Well-
Oh, good. It's upsetting people who go for the normal stuff or whatever it might be.
right, exactly.
Especially
So,
people
well-
who are true crime fans. Like everybody seems to be a true crime fan at this point. And what I liked about that one about the hotel in LA, I keep forgetting the name of it.
Oh,
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
it starts with a C. Why
Yeah,
am I blanking
the
on it?
She ended up in a water tower on the
Yeah,
roof somehow.
Yeah,
Right.
so
It's one of the
scary.
weirdest stories.
Oh yeah, one of the weirdest stories.
Sure.
But what
Cecil,
it's also
Cecil?
the Cecil, yeah,
Cecil?
and it's close enough. But
Well,
Well, though, the people in the chat later are gonna be like, "It's this."
yes.
yeah, right,
You idiots.
yeah.
Well, anyway,
So the thing is, that's a very big cautionary tale, right? They ruin people's lives, the detectives, the true crime people who are like, we're gonna figure this out. Nobody else is doing it right, blaming everybody else for being incompetent and all this stuff. And look at the dark secret, and they're like, "Oh, we have 800 rooms. People die in hotels. That happens. It's not secrets. You go to any hotel, there's things that they're not going to tell you about who died in what room, and people who commit suicide in hotel rooms. All that stuff happens." And so
maybe it
what
was
I
the
liked about it
wallpaper
was
that drove him to it.
yeah, right. And the whole idea that true crime can be dangerous. It's this idea of needing to know, right? And it used to get people mad because I would say mysteries, horror movies are far more honest than mysteries are. At least in horror movies, you empathize at some point with the victim, but there's nothing but cynicism about life in mysteries. We start with the death, and what we do is we destroy the reputation of the dead person, and we destroy the reputations of everybody else, that no one is really a nice person. And it's all in this idea that we don't really care about the death anymore. We care about the dirt. And so
that's deep.
yeah, and the horror, whether you like it or not, at some point, that's where the surprise comes from. Comedy is where you have a main character doing things you'd never get away with, and that's a certain attraction. And in horror, you watch people go through things that you hope you never have to, and so that builds empathy. And so when I hear that something like The Watcher, people are really disappointed at the end, I can't help but think that the true crime people are upset because they don't get the money shot. They're not getting whatever it is that they're looking for.
Well, I'll be
And
interested
so-
in your opinion after you've watched the whole thing. See what you think.
Yeah. I'm intrigued to take a look at that, because there's been so many documentaries of recent that are really anti-documentary. That, by the way, what you think this is about isn't what it's really about, and it's the desire for sensation that is creating these things. So it's interesting because I don't know what a documentary is anymore. When I was growing up, documentaries used to not have a point of view that things were edited.
Yeah, it was just like, here's the facts, and by the way, we can back up all of these facts.
Yeah.
And there you go.
Or even earlier than that, the Maisels brothers, right? They used to do things like Shoeshine and Missile. And it was just a story that was an hour long of following a guy doing shoeshines. Or people at the Strategic Missile Command in the Air Force learning about what you do with nukes. So there's a point of view by what they pick, right? The subject that they decide to pick. But they would go in and there's no narration. It's just the story. So that used to be what people called pure documentary, where it was like, oh, you come in and you're literally just finding out about this world. And then it started to change. And some things that changed, like Harlan County, USA, which was all about union strikes in the mines in West Virginia. And it becomes big because they capture a murderer on camera. They're able to slow it down and show this guy pointing a gun out and killing one of the activists. And so at that point, things start to get more of a point of view that's established or orchestrated. And of course, we've always been talking about how much do you change the village when you have a camera and you come in to record the village? Are you actually recording the village, or is it the Louds, right? That family that PBS followed, and then oh my God, Albert Brooks made into a comedy called Real Life, I think, where everybody's so aware of the camera that they're just making every argument a huge drama, and by the end you're not sure if you've even met them.
Which is sort of, in some ways, the world we live in now, because everyone may not be in front of a literal camera, as in quote unquote reality TV, but they're putting themselves out there, many of them on social media, every little thing that they do,
yeah,
you know, and drama creates dopamine, because you get all these, you know, you get all these click-throughs, you know,
right,
that you wouldn't have before. But anyway, that's not my purview. Pete and Matt had to leave, but thanks for being here, Scott. Really
yeah,
appreciate
thanks.
it.
It was great.
Next week we're gonna have Nathan Ballingrud. He's got a new
Cool.
book coming out called The Strange, set on Mars. Really interested in that one because love Ray Bradbury, of course. After that, Scott Nickley, and then Mary Rickert on the 27th. She wrote a really great novella called Lucky Girl, How I Became a Horror Writer, a Krampus story. So yeah, it's not a huge read. Everybody should pick that up. I'll include that one too in the show notes. And then after that, Jonathan Jans. So anyway, some great guests coming up, and thanks for chatting with us, Bridget. Rick, thanks for being here, and we'll see everybody next week. Thanks for being here.